A gradated landscape is where you use dark tones in the foreground, mid-tones in the midground, and then the lighter tones right in the distance. And that helps create a sense of depth in your artwork. So it looks like it's actually 3D and the landscape is moving away from you. I'm going to teach you just how to do that today so that you can have a copy of this in your sketchbook and you can start to understand how to use paints to create a gradated landscape. So you're going to be creating different tones and different shades of paint. Today you're going to be using the watercolour pans. So some of them might look like this with lots of different colours, or you might have one with less colours. You might be able to find some of these if you ask Miss nicely. You will need the tops of your pans because this is where you're going to be mixing your colour, and you'll also need a nice paintbrush and some water and a piece of paper to work on. What I would like you to do first in your sketchbook, and very neatly, is to experiment with creating a range of shades and tones of paint. I've got my green that I've mixed up here already, and what I'm going to do is neatly just pop a painted square here. So that's the original colour, that's the colour that I've started off with. It's not actually that dark. Probably what I'd need to do is work in to the pan and start to add a little bit more colour. So I've got some more pigment in my paint. Okay. So pigment is the colour that's actually in the block in the watercolour pan. So I've got that. I'm going to have another go. And it's slightly deeper in hue. Not much, but I can actually put a couple of layers over the top of that. So what you're going to be learning to do today is using water to vary the shades and tones within the paint. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of my paint and pop it over here. And then I'm going to add just a couple of drops of water. And what this is going to do is make my paint much weaker. And you can see there already that it's much lighter. You are going to be using this technique to create different colours or different tones and shades for your landscape. So if you remember back to the picture where you have your darkest tones at the front and then your lightest tones at the back. So if you look here, we've got darker tones and light tones that I can then use for my landscapes. What you're going to do after testing your paint is actually create your own landscape. So you're going to be using your piece of paper and a pencil to create your landscape drawing. So what you need to do is actually draw your landscape first on your piece of paper. Once you've drawn your landscape, you're then going to use the paint to actually add the colour. So looking at this here, there's lots of different hills, there's trees in the front, there's these cloudy sort of sections up here. There's quite a few layers in this painting. So they haven't just done one or two, they've actually got quite a few in there. And this one at the front is really dark or really deep. And then the one behind is actually quite light. So you're going to be creating something similar. You can copy some of the shapes that you see in these or in the photos, or you can come up with your own. I'm just going to use a crayon to add my lines for my landscape just really quickly. And I'm going to think about where I want those peaks and troughs and how I want the sort of parts of the landscape to work with each other. I don't want them to look exactly the same. I'm not wanting to create like a uniform sort of landscape. And if you can see, this one's actually coming down this way, and this one here can actually look like it's coming down and towards there. So that's the start of my landscape. What I'm going to do now is paint my darkest tone. Right, okay, so I realised after videoing that actually you couldn't see the darkest colour that I was painting. So I've just readjusted so you can actually see. So I've painted my darkest section here, and actually I'm going to go in and add another layer of colour over the top just to make it a little bit darker. You can keep adding layers You don't want to scrub too much. With the watercolours, you just let the water move the colour along the paper. If you start scrubbing on the surface or really trying to add overly painting, then you end up with lots of peeled paper, so the paper will start to lift off of the surface of the whole paper, so you get lots of lumps in it. So I've got those 2 layers now. What I'm going to do is add a little bit more a little bit more water to my pan, and then I'm going to paint my next section. So as I said, each time you add water, it will slightly lighten the paint, so you end up with a really nice tonal landscape with lots of different shades. So it'll lighten it up for you. I'm going to pop it in. It's getting a bit dry. You don't want your brush to get too dry when you're using the watercolour pans. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is use more water again. So another couple of drops, lighten it up, and then I'm going to go in and paint here. So I might add a little bit more water here because I want it to be a bit lighter. So you can see it's a constant process where you're lightening it up and thinking, actually, is that light enough? Do I need to make it a bit darker? And you're thinking about the landscape that you're creating. So for the sake of this, we can actually see the lines that I created with the crayon, but hopefully your lines are so light that actually they are starting to disappear in the painted sections. You can leave a slight bit of paper showing so that you can, it sort of helps you see the difference between the hill in the front and the hill behind, so it adds to that visual effect. And what I'm going to do is add quite a bit more for the sky. I know you won't have green sky, but it just it teaches you how to actually use a range of tone and how you can mix those tones. So as well as creating a landscape, you're actually learning how to mix the paints. There you go. Okay. See you later.